Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a fascinating journey. There were many things in history that were once considered perfectly normal and sometimes even acceptable. But as time went on, we realized just how horrific and unacceptable they truly were. In this video, we'll be uncovering 10 practices that were widespread in the past but are now universally banned or seen as completely immoral. Imagine living in a world where these things were the norm. How different would our reality be today? So, let's take a closer look at these practices that were once part of everyday life and explore how society changed and made them illegal. Some of these may shock you, and others might make you think twice about how far we've come. Ready to jump into it? Let's get started. 1. Slavery. Once a common practice. Now, a human rights violation. Let's start with one of the darkest chapters in human history, slavery. Slavery was once a widespread institution in many ancient civilizations, and it wasn't just a practice. It was an economic cornerstone for many societies. In ancient Greece, Rome, and even during the colonial era, slavery was perfectly legal. People were enslaved for various reasons: war captives, debt, or even because of their social status. In ancient Rome, for example, slaves were not only used for manual labor, but some were also forced to fight as gladiators in the arenas, turning their lives into entertainment for the masses. But over time, things began to shift. The abolition movement, driven by figures like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and William Wilberforce, challenged the idea of slavery and human subjugation. By the 19th century, slavery had been outlawed in most parts of the world, and today it is universally condemned as a violation of basic human rights. And while slavery as it existed in the past is gone, modern-day human trafficking still serves as a painful reminder that the fight for human rights is far from over. 2. Revenge killing and the breakdown of justice. Now, let's talk about blood feuds, something that might sound like it's straight out of a medieval story, but was once an actual reality for many cultures. Blood feuds were a form of justice, a way to settle scores and seek revenge when a loved one was killed or wronged. It was not about justice through law, but about vengeance taking matters into your own hands. In places like Iceland, during the Viking Age, blood feuds were part of the law of the land. If a person was killed, their family had the right to seek vengeance, often resulting in the death of someone from the offending family. This form of justice, however, proved unsustainable. As societies evolved and legal systems began to replace vigilante justice, blood feuds were recognized for what they really were: murder. In the modern world, blood feuds are not seen as a rightful form of justice. Instead, they're punishable by law. And murder is, of course, a criminal offense. This transformation in legal thinking illustrates just how far we've come in valuing life and promoting peace. 3. Duels. Fighting for honor, not justice. Imagine a world where if someone insulted you or your family, the only way to restore your honor was by fighting them to the death. Sounds dramatic, right? But this was the reality for many during the 17th and 18th centuries. Duels were common, especially among the aristocracy, and were often fought over matters of personal honor. Famous duels, like the one between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr in 1804, where Hamilton was fatally shot, became part of history. These duels were seen as an honorable way to settle disputes and prove bravery. However, as societies began to establish more formal systems of justice, the need for duels began to fade. By the 19th century, dueling had been outlawed in most countries. Today, duels are illegal, and anyone engaging in such an activity would face serious criminal charges. The transition from duels to legal resolutions reflects a broader shift toward using reason and law to resolve conflicts, rather than violence and bloodshed. 4. Witch hunts, a time of superstition and mass persecution. The idea of being accused of witchcraft and sentenced to death for it might sound like something out of a horror story, but it was a very real part of history. During the 16th and 17th centuries, witch hunts took place in Europe and the American colonies. These hunts were fueled by fear, superstition, and religious zeal. If someone was suspected of practicing witchcraft, they were often put on trial and tortured until they confessed whether or not they actually had anything to do with witchcraft. The Salem witch trials in Massachusetts, where 20 people were executed, mostly women, due to accusations of witchcraft, are some of the most infamous events of this time. But as scientific understanding grew and the Age of Enlightenment began to challenge superstition, these practices started to be seen for what they were: horrific injustices based on fear and ignorance. Witch hunts were eventually outlawed, and today, witchcraft accusations are viewed as a form of baseless persecution. In the modern world, no one is executed for witchcraft, and the belief in witches has largely been relegated to folklore and superstition. 5. Child labor, a shameful part of industrialization. Let's now jump into a practice that was once a horrifying reality for many children: child labor. During the Industrial Revolution, child labor was shockingly common. In factories, coal mines, and even on the streets, children as young as 5 or 6 were put to work. Why? Because children were cheap labor. They were small enough to fit into tight spaces in factories, and they were often paid less than adults. The working conditions were appalling: no safety regulations, long hours, and dangerous environments. In Britain, children worked in textile mills, where they could easily be injured by the machinery. In the United States, children worked in coal mines, where they risked their lives daily. But as the labor movement grew and the horrors of child exploitation became more widely known, laws were eventually put into place to protect children from such exploitation. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 in the U.S. made child labor illegal, and today, it's considered one of the most basic human rights violations to force children to work in hazardous conditions. However, despite these advances, child labor remains an issue in some parts of the world today. Many countries still struggle to enforce child labor laws, especially in poorer regions, but globally, there has been significant progress in reducing this exploitative practice. 6. Headhunting, once a sign of bravery, now a barbaric practice. Next up, we're talking about headhunting, a practice that was seen as a symbol of bravery in some ancient cultures. In places like Borneo, the Philippines, and parts of Africa, taking the head of an enemy was considered an act of valor. For example, in the Philippines, the Kalinga tribe would decapitate their enemies and display their heads as trophies, showcasing their courage and skill in battle. But this practice wasn't just limited to one region, it was also part of many tribal cultures around the world. However, as societies progressed, the idea of taking another person's life for a trophy or as a display of honor became widely regarded as barbaric. In modern times, headhunting is not just outlawed, it's seen as one of the most extreme forms of violence. Today, societies are built around the idea of justice, respect, and peaceful conflict resolution. In the past, headhunting might have been seen as a noble act. Today, it's a shocking reminder of how far we've come in valuing human life and dignity. 7. Forced marriages and child brides, the harsh reality of past customs. Let's talk about forced marriages and child brides, a grim practice that was once common across many parts of the world. In the past, it wasn't unusual for families to arrange marriages for their children, often without their consent. Sometimes these marriages happened when the individuals were just children themselves, with young girls being married off to much older men. In royal families, this was seen as a way to form alliances and maintain political power, while in many other cultures, it was considered just another tradition. But as societies grew more aware of the rights of women and children, forced marriages came under heavy scrutiny. By the 20th century, many countries had laws banning forced marriages and child brides. But despite these legal changes, the practice still continues in some parts of the world. Today, most nations have legal frameworks in place to protect young girls from being forced into marriages. Forced marriage is now widely recognized as a violation of human rights, and there are global movements fighting to end the practice. 8. Gladiator fights, blood sport for entertainment. The famous gladiators. Picture this. You're in the Colosseum in ancient Rome, surrounded by thousands of spectators, all eager to see bloodshed. Gladiators, often slaves or prisoners of war, fought each other to the death for the entertainment of the crowd. These brutal battles were seen as a form of sport, where the victor earned fame, and the loser, well, they paid with their life. Gladiator fights were the ultimate spectacle, not only in Rome, but in various parts of the ancient world. However, as the Roman Empire declined and Christianity spread, values began to shift. The human cost of such blood sports was no longer acceptable, and gladiator battles were eventually outlawed. Today, we look at gladiator fights with horror. The idea of humans fighting to the death as entertainment is unthinkable in modern society, where such acts would be classified as murder and illegal in any form. These brutal spectacles remind us of how far we've come in our respect for human life. 9. Animal fights, cruelty that was once an entertainment. Let's shift gears and talk about animal fights. Bullfighting, cockfighting, and dogfighting were once common forms of entertainment. In Spain, bullfighting has long been seen as a tradition, an art form, some might argue. For centuries, people would watch as men faced off against bulls, sometimes to the death. Cockfighting and dogfighting were also prevalent in various cultures, where animals were forced to fight one another for sport. But as our understanding of animal rights grew, these practices began to be viewed in a completely different light. Today, bullfighting, cockfighting, and dogfighting are illegal in many parts of the world, and they are widely condemned as cruel and inhumane. Some regions still defend bullfighting as a tradition, but the global shift toward animal rights is undeniable. We now understand that animals should not be treated as tools for human entertainment, and the idea of forcing animals into violent conflict is now viewed as barbaric. 10. Incest, a once normal practice among royals, now considered taboo. Lastly, let's discuss incest, which was once a common practice among royalty and certain aristocratic families. In ancient Egypt, for example, it was not uncommon for pharaohs to marry their sisters to keep the royal bloodline pure. Similarly, in European royal families, cousin marriages and even closer familial unions were seen as a way to consolidate power and maintain the purity of the bloodline. But as genetics became better understood, the dangers of inbreeding became clear, leading to the abandonment of incestuous marriages. Today, incest is illegal in most countries and is considered a serious taboo in many cultures. The understanding of genetics and the risks of birth defects and genetic disorders have played a major role in this shift. What was once a practice accepted by royalty is now regarded as a severe violation of social norms and laws, and is punishable in almost every society. So there you have it, 10 practices that were once considered normal but are now banned or seen as deeply immoral. These practices were once part of everyday life, but thanks to societal shifts, legal reforms, and a better understanding of human rights. They've been abolished or replaced with more ethical systems. As we reflect on these changes, it's important to remember that societies evolve over time, and what was once acceptable may not be today. The world has come a long way in protecting human rights, valuing life, and ensuring that justice is served. But even though we've made great strides, it's crucial that we continue to challenge outdated practices and ensure that we never go back to the dark days of history. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these shocking historical practices. See you in the next video.